Let's talk about interest rates, rate hikes perhaps threatening a new recession. They went up again. What's the pattern you're seeing here with the Fed?
Sure. Well, they went up again by this time 0.5 percentage point. We'd had 4 rate hikes in a row at 0.75 percentage point. The Fed is slowing down. It's getting closer to where it thinks it needs to be. And you can see that here on this chart, how high it's taken it, the highest since back in the 2000s. And what I would note here, and it's not a prediction, is that if you look at the first 2 rate hikes runs on the left side, one is right before the dot-com implosion, if you want to call it that, and the second before the GFC. Rate hikes of this magnitude, and if I went back further, you would see a similar pattern. Rate hikes of this magnitude are often, if not usually, associated with a recession. Something out of 11 of 14 times that the Fed is engaged in a rate hike episode like this has ended in recession. They didn't predict it yesterday. I'm not necessarily predicting it today, but I think most economists think it's likely.
Was that about where you thought it was going to be, the 0.5 point, Steve?
The 0.5 point was totally in line with the market. What was less in line with the market was some of what the Fed said about what they expect to have happen. And so we can turn to what's happening.
Higher rates for a longer period of time.
Higher rates for longer and more of an economic impact. And so the inflation numbers we talked about yesterday were slightly better than expected. That was good news. We talked about that. They weren't, however, good enough for the Fed to not raise rates and to issue its own set of projections, which we'll talk about in a second. But on the right, you can see in the blue and the dark colored dotted lines, this is what the Fed expected. They predict their rate hikes for us. They tell us what they think is going to happen. And this is what they thought was going to happen over the last several months, the bottom being June and then September and now current. And you can see each time they've made a set of projections, it has been higher rates for longer. And so they have gradually come to the realization that dealing with inflation is going to take a little bit longer. The red line is what the market, the bond market, basically thinks is going to happen. It's somewhat more optimistic than the Fed, but both of them have been way overly optimistic throughout this period of time.
And as you mentioned, Steve, the Fed expressed a little bit of pessimism about where we're headed here. That inflation number caused some people to say, okay, maybe we are trending in the right direction. A couple of days ago, Fed not necessarily sharing that view.
Correct. We all like that number, but it wasn't good enough, as I said. And so the Fed also issues a set of projections every 3 months for where they think the economy is going. And what this basically, again, takes your June, your September, your December projections, light blue, middle blue, and then dark color, and lines them up. And you can see that on inflation, the Fed has become consistently more pessimistic, gone from 2.7% expected inflation in 2023 up to 3.5%. It's taken its GDP growth estimate down to only 0.5%. So that's not quite a recession, but it's very close to a recession. And you can see on the right, it's taken its expected unemployment number up higher, up to 4.5%. And so that's the basis for which those higher rates appear to be going for longer. And yes, the Fed has not predicted a recession. Most economists have predicted one in there. But even in the Fed's view, we're going to be scraping along the bottom next year in terms of economic growth.
And John Meacham, we had talked about Ronald Reagan earlier, and Lincoln. It's interesting. You look at how this is lining up. We all remember the stories of Morning in America in '84. I remember the ad. Everybody thought, God, the economy is really turned around. Things are going so wonderfully. You go back and look, and unemployment was at like 7.4%. Wasn't doing that strong. It was all relative. And sometimes, and I'm sure 41 told you this a great deal whenever you had discussions with him, sometimes it's just all about timing. The economy turned around the fourth quarter of 1992. If it had turned around a quarter or two earlier, George H.W. Bush would have been reelected and would have beaten Bill Clinton. So it's all about timing. But you look at these numbers, they seem to be lining up fairly well for Joe Biden if he decides to run for reelection in 24. The inflation and some of the recessionary problems get washed out in 23, and by 24, looks like we're moving to where we were in 1984.
I think that's right. Steve has forgotten more about this than I know. But yes, I think that the infrastructure pieces, literally and figuratively, are in place. And to connect these two parts of the conversation, what President Biden offers is sanity and stability. And even if you don't agree with him on 100% of policy, you know he's not going to suspend the Constitution one afternoon because he is grumpy. And that's kind of a low bar, I guess, for an American president. But as you say, everything is relative. It's been a remarkable couple of years. To me, the really interesting question, and you and I have talked about this before, is are there too many people who have a reflexively partisan disposition? That is, that no matter what the facts are, they can't vote for a Democrat or they can't vote for a Republican. Is there something that's just so ingrained? What we saw, it seems to me, in the midterm was people saying that they were worried about some issue, perhaps it was Dobbs, perhaps it was something else, plus this threat to democracy. And I don't know if the democracy issue was the single driver. Anecdotally, I doubt it. But I think it was part of a matrix of decision. And I think what the president offers here is a restoration of a conversation about where we should be and where we should go as a country. That's a conversation that may not be perfect, but is rational and durable. And what the 45th president represents is the end of that conversation and the replacement of it at first with political laser tag. And that political laser tag then became physical insurrection.